Well, Ethan, it's good to see you again, my friend. It's been a long time since we fought in the hills of Camillus together. Thank you.
I think of it more as the swamp.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you for visiting us with us at A.G. Russell Knives. Perhaps you could tell us how you got into the knife business.
Well, by mistake, actually. I had always been a big fan of the kukri knife, and I started collecting when I was 16 or 17. And for me, a big collection at that point was, I think, 3. But I had sent 2 of them with friends to Vietnam. Both friends came back, but neither knife did. And they all had the same complaints. The 2 friends had the same complaints I did, that the steel wasn't terribly good. The handle was built for somebody who is built like a Gurkha, which is to say quite small. And the sheaths sucked, which they did. And so I had acquired a case survival machete from World War II, loved it. And so I decided to combine the 2 of them. And I had tried to get Case to make that knife again because I was scared to death I'd lose it because I'd never seen another one and for eBay, and I never would have gotten another one. So I read an article, a guy down in Texas somewhere, custom maker, and he had made a couple of kukri knives. So I called him, and he said, well, he said, I don't know if I ever want to make another one of those damn things. And he said, if I did, I'd have to get $400, $450 for it. Well, this is 1973, 74. That was pretty big money. So I was running, owned a little company called Colorado Mountain Industries. We made mountain climbing equipment. Well, I had a ton of 4140 steel in the back that I knew I could heat treat. And I thought, $400, well, hell, I've got the machinery. I'll make a damn knife.
How hard can it be?
So instead of making a knife, I made 200. And I was in the knife business. I had no business being in the knife business. I didn't know anything about the knife business. I didn't know how to sell knives. And I could just barely make them, let alone do the rest of it. And that was almost 40 years ago. I guess I'm in the knife business. So
firmly in the knife business.
So, but the first edged thing I ever got, I got at age 6 or 7, and it was a hatchet. My parents got it for me for my birthday. I still have a picture somewhere showing little Ethan staring with rapt attention at his new plum hatchet. And it's funny because it takes a lot more now to get my attention, but there's always something in the cutlery line that gets my attention again and gets that sense of wonder going. Well, the one that's been in the line the longest at this point,
the companion,
is the BK2, which is, I think of it now as my Armageddon knife. It is the knife that if all else fails, this probably won't. It's a 1/4-inch thick steel. It's 1095 Crovan, which is an extremely fine steel, I think. And I was at a Knife Nuts in the Woods gathering a few years ago over in North Carolina. And the people around our fire had tended to group in fires. And I said, okay, I brought this knife. I said, I want you to use it for everything. This is going to chop the onions for the chili. It's going to cut the meat. It's going to but we're going to use it to baton out the cook wood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we used that knife literally over 5 days for everything for 6 guys. And it was still doing what it needed to do at the end of it. And it did everything. Now, is it an onion slicer? Well, yeah.
In a pinch.
But on the other hand, it will and can do everything from the little itty bitty tiny stuff to moderate chopping. And it's compact power. Not light, but it's compact. And it's one of 2 knives that have had national stock numbers for the military. And I think it was the special ops guys, if I remember correctly, when you and I were both hanging around at Camillus, they had a serrated version.
Yes.
That
we put
bought
about
quite
a
a bit.
2-inch patch of serration at the exiting the choil. Yeah.
And they sold quite a few of those, didn't they?
Oh yeah, 10,000 or more probably.
Really?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of them out there. Well, yeah, because we also offered the military version to civilians too.
Yes.
So it was available across the line.
Gotcha.
Perhaps now would be a good time to talk a little about the handle. When I first started engineering these knives for Camillus to produce them, the handle was unique to me. It caught my attention. It had features that I thought were unique I'd never seen before. I think explain to us the joy of the Camillus handle, of the Becker handle.
Well, the handle outline is largely the same one as World War II case knife, which originally the patent drawings have K-bar on them. But they gave it to the cousins across town because everybody was in the process of, okay, we don't have the capacity, the guys need them, so
shared
we'll
manufacture to produce for the troops, right?
So anyway, I took that and used it as a kind of a mandrel and put modeling clay, was it the stuff you bake that the craft people use a bunch of. Anyway, doesn't make any difference. So what I did was smeared that all over and then grasped the knife. So I'm fond of saying, I hope it fits your hand, but it fits this hand really well.
Right.
And what it did, and I had a hand surgeon, a good friend of mine, asked me if I had consulted a hand surgeon in the design. And but it's flared enough so that it doesn't work this part of your hand, and you can dip this knife or any Becker knife in oil and stab as hard as you want to, and you won't override.
You still end up with a knife in your hand, right?
Now, I do not recommend trying that. There are YouTube videos. Foxwalk Primitive did one and dipped it in olive oil, and it's worth looking it up because of the trepidation and that body English that he displays just before he's pretty sure he's going to hurt his hand really bad.
The other thing that struck me as quite unique at the time was it wasn't checkered. It didn't have go faster stripes on it. Perhaps speak on that.
Well, that's if the only thing you're going to use a knife for is to stick somebody else with it, then you want checkering all over it. If you're going to be using it for fieldcraft tech stuff, you don't want any hot spots, you don't want any blisters. And yes, we should all only use an outdoor knife and an outdoor setting wearing gloves, and I very rarely do. I always have them in my pocket. But it should never give you an issue. And people say, oh, but it's so slick. Well, no, it's smooth. There's a difference.
Right.
And again, you can dip them in oil. Don't. but it can't. It's been done. There was a knife writer. Was a good friend. His name, of course, I can't remember at the moment. Who said it was a perfect knife to take along if you had to field dress a Buick. And and it has to field dress a Buick or two. And that brings up another early design, and that's the tack tool, which was designed really as a combination, initially as both a dive knife and as a SWAT tool.
Right, right.
So this was both a couple of professional divers I knew and some friends of mine, John Benner, who at that time was running the Hamilton County SWAT team, wanted a pry bar with a sharp edge they could beat on things with. So this is a pry bar that you can beat on things with and also has a sharp edge to it.
Right.
And it has, I was present when a volunteer fire department completely deconstructed a Dodge Omni. And with 3 guys on it, they managed to break it trying to remove the nadir pin. But it took three
guys.
stout
Right.
volunteers.
And the point is, you could cut your way in or out of a vehicle with it
or out
if
of
necessary.
pretty much anything.
Yeah, clear the glass. Yeah.
We sold a bunch of them to the diplomatic security people because one of the guys had taken one to Baghdad and was in the Al Rashid Hotel when it got bombed, and he pried his way out of his room through a steel door with it. And the guy from the toy buyer for diplomatics, the DSS, said, "I don't get phone calls telling me what a good idea I had. So we're going to buy a bunch of these." It's a very useful tool. It's not something I would personally recommend that you carry around in the woods, but
Right.
a number of people have and love it. And when you and I were at Camillus, the head of new products at that time asked me to come up with a modern version of the Marine Combat.
Right, right.
And that resulted in this guy, which is
BK7.
the Combat Utility BK7. And the idea behind what I tried to do is to come up with roughly the same package as the Marine Combat. And a handle is hard to make it make it compact enough to fit in the same place. But this again is one of those tools that you can do a certain amount of. I don't really highly recommend doing this. I mean, cut a stick, make a baton. You know, if you have to chop. But on the other hand, it's the 7-inch size is a kind of a bastard size because it's usually too big to do little stuff with comfortably and not big enough to do the chopping and whacking and stuff. But on the other hand, it is designed to be used to do the little fieldcraft chores, as well as it's not the world's best skinner because tip control's a little difficult, but you can always put a thong through here and
Right. Yeah, secure.
wind the thong up here and use it for
fine
tip work.
cutting. Right, right.
But it's and a lot of units won't let guys carry anything bigger than the K-bar.
And of course, weight becomes an issue too when you're schlepping a lot of material
Always.
around too.
I was Steve Dick, who was one of the smartest guys,
Absolutely.
smartest writers in our
Tactical
industry,
knives,
and
yeah.
who was a pretty serious grunt when he was grunting.
Oh yeah, no, he had a relationship with Puff the Magic Dragon, I'm told.
Yes, it's so funny because long before I was asked to do this, I was at a BS beer and BS session, and everybody was talking about how to redo that knife. And one of the things, because I said, well, it needed to be thicker, and he said, no. He said, an infantryman doesn't need any more weight. And it's certainly true. If you're carrying 110 pounds to 120 pounds of crap around, you don't need any extra ounces.
Exactly.
So,
although you still have the lightning sections in the handle, so
right.
you
We
minimize the
tried to take
unnecessary
as much of
mass
that out without,
and maintain balance. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's in its size range, I don't think there's anything much better out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get back to the BK-10, which was another Camillus-inspired design because they wanted somebody to come up with something to replace the
The 5-inch jet pilot's knife.
aircraft survival knife.
Right. And that's called the crewman, right?
Right. This is the crewman. And the aircraft survival knife was just a horrible idea. Saw blades on the back of knives don't work. Okay? They just don't.
They look cool, but
They look. When I was like 13, I got a 14-inch Swiss artillery bayonet that had really aggressive saw teeth on the back of it, and I thought I had come across the universal tool. Foolish churl that I was. So I immediately discovered what was wrong with saw teeth on the back of a knife blade. They go in as far as the saw teeth are deep, then they stop.
Right, because there's no relief cut.
Yeah.
Plus it's a pre-cracked place for the blade to break.
Yes. Sharpie notch, yes. Let's not have one Sharpie notch. Let's
bunch.
make a whole row of them. So a Sharpie notch is a 45-degree cut with a file, and it's used to break things. So anyway, what the aircraft survival knife needs to be is a fieldcraft knife.
Right.
And which means that it needs to be fairly wide with a nice, the grind comes up to about here, so there's a lot of slice. Because the whole purpose of a knife is to cut things. It's not, I used to think that the primary reason to have one was as a pry bar, but the primary reason is to cut things. And it does a marvelous job of that. This is 3/16, 5/32 thick, and which is plenty strong. And it really, really is an excellent little fieldcraft knife. Then we get to the BK-9, which the people on my forum refer to as the King. This was inspired by a knife that was originally designed by Bill
Moran. Moran.
Bill Moran. I'm 73, okay? So he designed a knife he called the Rio Grande Bowie.
Yes.
Which was made briefly by Mike Stewart. And the idea behind that was as a universal knife that Ken Warner, when he was with NRA Publications, went to Vietnam as a correspondent, and he went to Bill Moran and said, I want a knife I can do anything with.
Right.
So the Rio Grande Bowie was the result of that, and this doesn't look like a Rio Grande Bowie, and certainly, but it is the idea behind it. At that time, I'd made my reputation making kukri type objects, but Americans carry Bowie knives.
Right.
I mean, that's the American knife. So when I put this on paper, I didn't really think I had much going for it, that it was just going to be a Bowie knife. And it turned out to be one of the 2 or 3 best things I've ever designed. It does not weigh a lot, but it chops way above its weight.
Yes, indeed.
Every big knife I ever designed is designed to also be used to do little stuff. So if you're making a tent stake, you can harvest a tent stake, you can crown the top, you can do the whole works without changing tools and do it comfortably. And again, you can do point work if you use a thong, although it's not one of the things I recommend, but if it's the tool you've got, if it's the tool you got, that's the tool you're going to use.
Interesting thing I notice is that by Camillus designation, this would be the HH version. In that
Yes.
the swedge was added on a limited number.
No,
It was
no,
called
they
the
sharpened the swedge.
Did they only sharpen it? Are you
Yeah,
sure?
yeah, the swedge was there, but they sharpened the swedge for the hog
The hog
hunter.
hunter version.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Which I understand that many hogs were dispatched with this blade. I prefer a 44 Magnum myself,
Yeah.
but that's personal preference. So anyway, one of the most popular knives that I've designed is this little neck knife, and this is 2 3/4 of an ounce. And again, made out of 1095 Crovan. It's full height ground, and it is an extraordinarily useful little knife. This particular one has skinned several deer and is probably split out the small kindlings for well over 200 fires. And the reason that I've split out that many kindlings for small fires is that my ex-wife really, really liked to have a fire in the morning. And a friend of mine, Jim Noka, said to me one time, he said, the best place to practice building a one-match fire is in your fireplace. And I thought immediately, I thought to myself, people who live in northern Michigan obviously don't have enough to do. But then I got to thinking about it, and what an easy way to build dirt time. Right. So pretty soon, it becomes as automatic as bunching up some newspaper and throwing it in the fireplace. And I've taken this, obviously not this blade, and driven it into end grain white oak to where it just won't pop out, and gotten over 45 degrees of flex before failure. And if you haven't figured out that the knife is about to break if you get over 40 degrees, well, shame on you. I'll still replace it.
You're about to learn something.
Right, yes. We'll still replace it, but pay attention. Yeah. So this actually is the basis for what I always have this. If it's legal for me to have it, this is in my left front cargo pocket. If I leave the room, if I leave my bedroom and I have shoes on, this is in my left front pocket. And this is a trick I learned from Dave McIntyre, who won the Alone show second year, I think. Mm-hmm. He and I spent some time a weekend together, and he had this on his neck knife. And all this is a piece of inner tube, bicycle inner tube, but there's a button light, compass, fire stick, a little tinder, and a diamond sharpener. And
all snuck into the sheath, and superb.
And it's the problem with most of these systems is that they start to get like this,
right,
and they're no longer neck knives. It's the same thing with pouches on sheaths. A small pouch, I think, is an okay thing. Enough to put a bic and a couple of maybe a little cordage and a sharpener in, as the sheath for the BK16, which is we'll get to next. This is not big enough to really get in the way, but there's enough, you can put enough stuff in there
Right.
to help sustain life. Here is, this knife has an interesting history. I'm pretty good friends with the guys that run Becker Knives, and we're kind of rivals in a sense, but on the other hand, we have too much fun together
We're
to
all in it
really
together.
take it too seriously. So there was a young fellow from Denmark who was very active on my forum and on the Becker forum, and he really loved my necker blade, and he really liked the Izula handle from Becker. So he was taking a welding course at the time, and he took it to class and chopped it in half and welded it back together and made it pretty and put it up on the forums, and people went crazy. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I called Jeff and I said, what do you think we ought to do? And he said, I think we ought to make a piss pot full of them. So we did. And they've been very popular, and they have most of the same advantages as the necker. I prefer my handle a little bit more, but that's because it fits my hand better than,
And you got your wire breaker on that one too, right?
well, I've got a twisty wire breaker, and a little gadget here that will help you to open an adult beverage at the end of a hard day.
Right.
So, but this is a great little blade for 2.75 of an ounce. I mean, I have used this to baton down 4.5-inch trees. Now,
It took a while.
not long.
Really?
Not long. Now, I wasn't going into standing dead oak, okay? That would have taken a while. But in the part of the world I've been living, tulip poplars, if you harvest a tulip poplar, you come back the next day, there'll be 3 of them where that one was. So it's an ever renewable resource, and a perfect thing to make shelters and stuff out of, because it's you'll end up with another one next week. And then we get to this little guy, and this I'm not exactly sure why I designed this, except I've always been fascinated with miniature stuff. And this is actually a pretty useful little blade. It's one of the world's best pocket steak knives.
What's the designation? BK1?
This is a BK13.
BK13.
And it's just a nice little extra thing to have if you've lost everything else. This one, they don't cost much, and they're an excellent little blade. Again, 1095 Crovan. This is one of the few blades that I've ever designed that ended up being hollow ground.
Interesting. What sort of coating is it on that too?
It's a resin coating, powder coat.
Right, but smooth.
But smooth,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And then we get to the knife that as a parent of these blades, I would like to think that I love all my children equally, but I would be lying through my teeth. When I was 14 years old, I saved up my nickels and dimes and bought a Puma Hunter's Friend. And even after I was making my own knives, designing knives, that knife was never very far away from me. It was in a pack, but it was handy. If I was in the woods and it wasn't there, I felt nervous. And I literally carried it for over 50 years until I talked somebody into making this guy, which happened to be K-Bar. And this is a very simple 4.25-inch blade, which is all the field crafty guys say your blade ought to be about this big. And again, it's short enough that if you get up into here, you have tremendous tip control if you're skinning. You can baton with it. And most of the stuff you're going to baton to get a fire going, you're not going to be attacking 12-inch rounds. You know, you're going to be attacking little stuff. And it also is an extremely handy, this is a pretty good onion slicer. It does a hell of a job on salami. And it is an extremely easy knife to do fieldcrafty stuff. Now, mind you, I took a 14-inch patrol machete that you've made.
Yes, yes.
And made a fire kit with it at a class I went to. And I had, I was in a fairly confined space, and I got what little extra space there was because carving and stuff with a 14-inch machete has a tendency to make the people who are with 18 inches away from you a little nervous. But I got it done. It was a kind of a, I made a fire kit of board and bow and stuff. So, but this guy is probably the handiest blade. These two together are extraordinarily handy. You'll note that this is fairly thin and cross-sectioned, and it is slightly egg-shaped. Through this, I don't know if you can see that or not. But that egg shape fits, makes a great fit in your hand, and is extremely comfortable. And this again has a smooth-ish, but not slick handle, which again, you'll note that this area right in here makes it difficult
Good choke point.
to over travel. And this nice smooth exit that back here makes sure that there's nothing works the bottom base of your little finger. And I often think to myself, you know, we all talk about, you know, what's the one knife? I mean, how many times have you heard that discussion?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is that there is no one knife.
No.
There are ones that come closer than average to it. But the one that I find myself reaching for, the two that I find myself reaching for out of all my children, is this guy and this guy. And I mean, I want to, if you put the three of these together,
You've pretty much got it covered.
you got everything you really need. I make a nice big kukri, which was designed by Hank Reinhardt.
Right.
The blade was designed by Hank Reinhardt and is an absolute mover of material. You can make chips with that. But it's heavy, heavier, and under certain circumstances, if I was if I was fighting in a jungle environment, would I want the Reinhardt? You damn well better
Absolutely.
believe I would.
Clear brush and opponents.
Yeah. A wonderful fieldcraft tool and a fearsome fighting tool. But these three are the ones that I recommend that if you go into the woods with these three guys, you will not be underknifed.
Yeah, you got it covered.
You got everything covered.
Well, these are knives that work for a living. Right? So,
They are indeed.
Yep.
They don't work for a living. I'll be very angry at that particular child if it didn't work for you.
thank you so much, my friend.
Have a good one.